evening, everyone. So it's our second Monday of the month, and we are, as usual, as it happens every second Monday of every month, we have our English meeting here, and tonight's not going to be different. So we will have Hendrick later on talking a little bit for us about the gospel according to Spiritism on suffering well or suffering badly. But before we reach and ask and invite him to be here with us, we want to say a prayer, an initial prayer for us to focus a little bit more, and after that we will read and make a brief comment on a message from the book Our Daily Bread, and then after that we will invite Hendrick to give us the main talk of the night. So if you want, just for the sake of focusing and concentrating a little bit more, we usually close our eyes so that we can enter in deep contact with the good spirits that are surrounding us, in contact with Jesus, our Master, and our older brother, and above it all, entering close contact with our Father, God, who created everything, including all of us. Dear God, we pray for you tonight to give you thanks for the opportunity of being here once again to study, to read, to understand, but most of all to feel the message of love that you send to us every single second of our lives, and that you sent to us through our older brother Jesus, when he came to be with us, not only to say what was your law, but to practice what was your law, so that we would have a model, a guide, someone that we could look for and follow the paths that he already walked, so that we can get closer and closer to you. So tonight we would like to ask you that your love and your blessings can fill our hearts, so that we can feel this love within ourselves, in order for us to practice them in our words, in our thoughts, and towards everyone. So may these blessings stay with us tonight and always. So be it. So, as I said in the beginning, we would like to read a small message or a brief message from the book Our Daily Bread, which was psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier and written through him by the Spirit Emmanuel. And the message is message number 101, and it's called Resist Temptation. And in the book of James, chapter 1, verse number 12, James says the following: Blessed is the man who endures temptation. And Emmanuel makes the following comment: As our spiritual ship sails through the waters of inferiority, we are not immune to severe inner conflicts, especially in the physical realm, whenever we undertake the improvement of our soul by making use of the work and obstacles presented by the world. We can expect an increase in the difficulties that confront us on the path of illuminated knowledge. Against our yearning for enlightenment, we are faced with past millennia of darkness, opposing our most humble aspirations to grow in the good. There are centuries in which we took pleasure in evil. Hence, amongst the blessings from on high, temptations of all sorts abound on the disciples' path. At times, disciples believe they are well prepared to slay the dragons of animality that prowl about their doors. However, when they least expect it, degrading suggestions pounce on them again and drive them into the challenging battle. Therefore, it is obvious that not even the grave can exonerate us from our duels with the darkness, because its roots extend into the very organization of our spirit. Only the death of our inner imperfection can free us from them. So, constructive tolerance should envelop the human pathway, because evil insinuations are going to encircle us round about as long as we linger in our partial accomplishment of the good. We will achieve freedom only when we attain full enlightenment. Understanding the transcendent importance of this fact, the apostle states, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation." At the present time, any reference to complete triumph is impossible, because we are still so very far from the angelic state. However, we will be blessed if we endure well these types of struggles and control the impulses of undeveloped sentiments, perfecting them little by little at the cost of our personal effort, so that we may not give the defenselessly to the inferior suggestion, perfecting them little by little at the cost of our personal effort, so that we may not give in defenselessly to the inferior suggestions that seek to turn us into living instruments of evil. Resist temptation. It is interesting because one of the things that we say when we are praying and saying the prayer that Jesus taught us is that God help us to resist temptation, resist evil, so that we may not go into fault. And these are the words that Emmanuel used as the title of this chapter, by inviting us to, as James invites us to endure temptation, to resist the temptation that is being presented to us. And of course, it is something that happens to everybody. If we already figured out a way of winning over something, and it's not a temptation anymore, let's say a person that never smoked and knows that smoking is bad for them. If another friend or if a person comes to that person that doesn't smoke and offers the person a cigarette, the person will say, "No, thank you." And that will not be a temptation, because the person doesn't have that urge to smoke. But it may be with the same person, if the person is, say, drinking too much and then is trying to put an effort not to drink, and a person comes and offers, it's going to be a lot of temptation. And even if you don't offer, even if you see it or if you smell it, or if you're on that time that you usually drink and then you're not drinking, then your mind is always there, trying to do it. So Emmanuel comes to us and says something for us to remember that this example that I'm using is just for this specific life, for these moments that we are here. But how he starts this message is really, really interesting, because he says our spiritual ship, our boat, like our Titanic, right, is sails through the waters. And he says sails through the waters of inferiority, of how low we still are, of how inferior we still are. And he says we are not immune to severe inner conflicts. So while we are sailing, of course we will be tempted, and the waters will go up and down, and we will go up and down with those waters. And he says that this happens especially while we are incarnated. And then he says that the thing is, why, and we may question ourselves, why are we like that? And he says, look, remember that if you are trying to do the good right now, please remember that by having lived thousands of years before here, probably in the previous lives, you were not trying to be better. You're not even thinking about it, and you were probably immersed into evil. So the more we practice evil, the better we get at it. And of course, it's hard for us to win over it, to conquer it, and to do the right thing at all times. So he asks us to, right at the beginning, he says, remember this, so that don't despair. It is something that will come, but, and then he says, we need to put the effort. So we know that we might fail. We know that probably we will fail, but we cannot give in to that. We have to be strong, and we have to, okay, I failed once more, but don't give up. Don't give in. Go on and do it again. And if next time, do it again. Try to find help anywhere we can. I mean, help in the Spirit Center, help with a psychologist, help with a friend, help with the family. It doesn't matter. What's important is that we need to keep going, and that we need to resist temptation. And that's the main topic of this message that he invites us to do. Say, blessed is the man who endures temptation, because we will all suffer temptation. What does James want to mean when he says blessed is the man who endures temptation? He's saying that if we will face temptation, but we will be blessed, we will be happy, we will be better when we go through it, and when we say no to it. And then we say, no, I'm strong enough so that I won't do it now. You fall, that's okay. Stand up again and do it once more. So it is not something for us to do it alone, and that's one of the things that that we come to realize after a while. And sometimes we tend to be so selfish or so proud that we don't seek help, that we don't look for help with in other people with other people. And we might fail, and we will fail again if we are trying to do it alone, or if we are trying to do the same thing over and over again, the same way I was doing before. So if one way that I'm trying to do it, I tried once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, if it's not working, we need to try to find a different way to make it work. Otherwise, we will just keep repeating everything that the same mistakes that we've been committing and doing for the past lives. And as a reminder, this weekend we had this talk here by Aline, and she told this story of Gandhi, a story that I've been telling for a long time, and that I've heard of a lot of people telling the same story. And I decided to check. I never had the the curiosity to check if it was Gandhi who actually went through that story. And the story seems to be true, but it seems that it was not Gandhi that went through that. It's an older story that was retold by someone else. Probably Gandhi told that story to someone, and then somebody assumed that it was him. That's common and that's normal, and that there is nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to make it clear, and I found it in the book. It's The Pleasantries of Mullah Nasruddin. It's an old Persian story of this guy, that he was a teacher, or a person that was wanted to teach people in using a different method of teaching. So he used to create jokes to teach people and told lots of different stories about it and so on. So the story is very well known. It's the story of the mother who came to ask someone. We always tell it's Gandhi, but like I'm saying, it's not Gandhi. He says this widow came, and I'm gonna mostly read it here. I printed it out so we get it as close as possible. It says, the widow came to the mullah's court and said, I am very poor. My young son eats a great deal of sugar. In fact, he is addicted to it. He is addicted to it. This means that I cannot make ends meet, that my money ends before the month ends. Would the court forbid him to eat sugar, prohibit him to eat sugar, because I cannot myself enforce this request? Would the court forbid him? Madam, said the mullah, this problem is not as easy as it seems. Return in a week, and the decision will be given, after I have examined the case more thoroughly. So come back in a week, and I'm going to examine why you're asking this, and then I'll give you the answer. After a week, the woman's name was again on the list of supplicants. I am sorry, Nasruddin said to her when her turn came. There will be another adjournment on this very tricky case until next week. So I don't have a decision yet. Still have like one more week to study the case. So I'll come back next week. Same thing happened for the following fortnight. At length, Nasruddin announced, the court will now give its injunction. Call the lad. Call the boy. The young man was brought before the mullah. Boy, thundered the magistrate, like, boy, you are forbidden to eat sugar except for half an ounce a day. The woman now expressed her thanks to the mullah and begged leave to ask one question. Say on, said Nasruddin. Your worship, I am mystified as to why you did not forbid the boy to eat sugar at any of the earlier hearings. Well, said Nasruddin, I had to get myself out of the habit first, didn't I? How could I know that it would take so long? I had to stop eating sugar. How would I know that it would take so long for me to stop eating sugar before I would tell you not to eat sugar? So it's the temptation. He had to resist temptation. It took him 2 weeks to stop eating sugar so that he would give the advice to somebody else. Not advice, because he's not giving the advice. He's forbidding the other. So this story has a lot to think about. But the part that I wanted to tell was the part that was connected to the resist temptation part. That is not easy. It's not simple, but it's worth it, because it's usually to something that damages our body or then it damages our spirit. So with that said, and I already spoke too much, I'm going to invite Hendrick for him to to give the talk of the night about the gospel according to Spiritism. Hendrick.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I like to start asking God and Jesus Christ to stay with us, to remain with us, to continue to bless us this evening, and that we could be inspired to have a good conversation on the topic that we have this evening. So I wanted to. The chapter that we're currently studying in the Gospel according to Spiritism is chapter 5, called "Blessed Are the Afflicted." It is, as I'm sure I mentioned before here, the one of the longest chapters in the book, I believe. There's a lot to be said about afflictions, suffering, I believe. A lot of the purpose of the Spiritist message, the Spiritist philosophy, is to be that which Jesus had promised to us, a consoler that he would send to us later on, to clarify and to bring forth to light the message of God, and to advance that message that he had started, that message of love, of love for one another, and loving God above all, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. So, this chapter then becomes, in the continuation of the Gospel to Spiritism, it starts to really delve into this whole, into this consoling portion of our understanding of sufferings, our afflictions, and we there are the chapter started discussing the justice of afflictions, why we suffer, why we have so many situations in life that seem unexplainable, etc. The previous chapter being on reincarnation. Actually, I have a cup right there. Thank you. Thank you. Come on. Thanks. So, chapter 4 was on reincarnation, and introducing us to the notion, obviously, somewhat novel to the Christian faith, the idea of reincarnation, which we've discussed in previous months. But in consequence of understanding reincarnation, we understand that suffering and the afflictions that we have are part of life in this world. As we have said before, this is a world of trials and atonements, and so everyone in this world is bound to have afflictions. So this message tonight is the very first message that is in the section that's called the Instructions from the Spirits in chapter 5. Usually the chapters are broken down into a little bit of a passage from the Bible, usually the New Testament, and then Kardec develops that idea and brings in the ideas that Spiritism brings with that discussion. In this case, it was this passage that in the Beatitudes that Jesus talks about those who are afflicted. So, but when Jesus, so the message starts, and this message is from a spirit named Lacordaire. This spirit was it's told that he was a priest that was, who was actually contemporary of some of the initial happenings around the starting of the communications that led to the Spiritist doctrine being codified. So he was a part of he participated in some of those medium meetings where the tables would be spinning and knockings would be heard and so on. And he, and there are even letters that he wrote, to family, I believe his sister, about some of the experience that he had been having around these meetings, and how this was opening him up, or his mind up to new ideas. But he passed away right around the time when Spiritism was, when the book, the Spirit's book was published, and so he comes back and he gives a few messages. I believe three. There are three, maybe more, in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And so this is one of them. He talks about the suffering well or suffering badly, poorly. And he starts by pointing out that Jesus said in his speech on Beatitudes, he said, "Blessed be the afflicted, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them." And it makes us think of why it is that he would that Jesus would tell us that, and yet and in another occasion tell us, well, this this world is those who are in this world will suffer. This is not the kingdom of heaven, as he always pointed out, and so this is not going to be a happy place for us. So if he said, "Blessed are the afflicted, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them," he couldn't be possibly saying that that it's just about everyone, right? And so he had to be a little more specific than that. And what Lacordaire comes to bring to light is this idea of how we suffer being really what is important, and how that makes all the difference. So obviously everyone on Earth suffers. This is a planet, as I said before, of trials and atonement. So we will suffer. It's part of life. And we've already studied reincarnation and why we reincarnate and why we have to be here. So it's part, the initial part of it all is to understand and accept that is true. And he points out, whether it's poor, whether it's rich, we are all here to suffer. And then he says, but, and here's what's important, it's so few of us suffer well. And, and he says, a mere handful understand that only trials which have been well supported can lead to the kingdom of God. And so, really, it's not the fact that we suffer that's going to connect us, to God, or that will bring us to the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus points out, but how we deal with those afflictions, with those situations that we find ourselves in. And so, he says, prayers support the soul. However, prayer alone is not enough. Pointing out, having been a very religious man himself, having been a priest, understanding religion, he realizes that, that wasn't enough, that just prayer alone and being, and being in touch with God through prayer wasn't really enough. But how we took how we take what it is that is given to us. As he points out, you have heard it said many times that God does not put a heavy burden on weak shoulders. So, we understand, and we need to understand that suffering or afflictions are part of life, and that no affliction will be given to us by God if we can't support it. If our shoulders can't take it, that will not be suffering that will be given to us. So obviously the consequence of what that means is, if we're suffering, is because we can take it. If God is giving us suffering, is because we can take it. And when we look at our neighbors and we think that they're not suffering that much, then maybe they just can't take it, and maybe we're a little better off that way. So and I think the theme of this entire conversation, this message, is all about really how do we take something that seems not good, or something that is clearly an affliction, and how can we work towards suffering well, as opposed to letting that suffering dictate our lives, and how we will or not succeed in improving ourselves. So so he says here, the burden is always in proportion to the strength, just as the recompense depends on the degree of resignation and courage. So he points out these two things: is obviously if we are suffering, is because we can take it, but also based on how we take that and how we internalize that the suffering as a lesson, and how we turn that lesson into something productive, that will make all the difference, in how it is that we suffer, and how it is that we will inherit this kingdom that Jesus promises us, right? So, he uses an allegory here of a soldier who's in war, who's living through a time of war, obviously. But he says, the soldier who wants to receive a promotion, he's not going to sit resting in the camp while everybody else is out in battle. He's going to want to go to battle, so that he can receive his recompense later, and his promotion, come from that, because he knows that he won't get a promotion from just sitting back in the camp and resting. Excuse me. So, we're not obviously advocating war. We're not advocating violence, anyways. But it's imagery that he used. So, because obviously it's, especially in Europe, has always been very, very very much a part of people's lives, understanding and dealing with neighbors and countries, fighting each other all the time. But anyway, but what his invitation to us is that we think like that soldier who's looking for the adversity, who's looking for that period where there will be suffering, where there will be risking, as a means to grow oneself. And so if we take the war, in the picture, and we turn that into, the battles that we have within ourselves of growth and growing pains, and then, his invitation is that we go and we look for what's difficult, and then we will go and work on that first, or we will work on that foremost. Obviously, without forgetting that, whatever we're going through is because we can handle. So if we can handle that, there might be something a little more interesting right after that, right? So, so it's good that we remember that, because a lot of the Spiritist message keeps coming back to a central theme of knowing oneself, of the only way that I have to progress and to grow into really a really thriving member of this kingdom of God, for just to keep using the same terminology here, to be an important member in this kingdom, I have to get better. I have to grow. I have to evolve. And that is a part of what makes, the Spiritist pursuit, that is the goal of, our understanding of life and what will lead us to God. So, and the only way to get there is really through understanding where our shortcomings are, where our problems are, where it is that we need to, what are the things that we need to work on. And so everything, in Spiritism, just like as in our afflictions, everything starts with, us understanding a little bit more about ourselves. So, in the interest of trying to understand, or trying to answer a little more specifically this idea of how to suffer well, or how to suffer badly, I wanted to bring a few examples from I forgot to write the name of the author down, but from a text that was a little bit around this topic. And just some examples, and not, obviously this is not the entire list, and it's not meant to be cover 100% of all of the reasons why we suffer, but maybe we can find ourselves in some examples, or we can find sometimes of ourselves from those examples. Thank you. And so a few things that we would like to point out here, before we get to the message that we'll put over there. So I had, let's see, we got a few 20 more minutes. So I guess not yet. We'll do that. We'll do that once I'm done with just this general. A few things here to think about, right? So, the people who suffer poorly, I guess, who suffer badly, there are those people, and I mean this. I don't mean to imply that this applies to anybody here or watching the video later or anything. Maybe one of these will fit, maybe not. Hopefully none of these fit yet, and then we'll continue. But who doesn't know this or that person who thinks they're a little bit of the center of the universe, right? Somebody who acts as if they're as if everything is supposed to revolve around them, like literally the center of the universe. Of course, I tend to make fun of, especially at work, of the people who are of the next generation from me, the millennials in particular, of their expectations of life, that everything is going to be handed off to them, and so on and so forth. But it's very interesting to think that personality, that sort of stereotypical personality of somebody who's never seen adversity, who's never actually had any problems growing up, because everything always worked for them, and now they're grown up and they can't ever be happy because the things don't actually work for them all the time. They don't have mommy or daddy fixing everything for them all the time, right? And so, their lives as center of the universe of their parents has changed quite a bit into, the realities of the world where, maybe they have a lot of friends who feel the same way, but that's still not going to solve the problem that they are not the center of the world, and therefore there is no way that you can be happy or have no affliction if you're expecting to be the center of everybody's attention, or that everything will work for you. And in the end, it doesn't. You're basically setting yourself up for failure. And so how can you be, how can that person be happy? So obviously that person will suffer from through that, and it's hard to recognize when and why why that is, when if all you do is put yourself in the center of the universe, then there are no answers that ever fit, right? Because the answers out there don't involve you being the center of everything. So and obviously this is an invitation for all of us who are parents or aspire to be parents, that it's how important it is to educate children from the early ages to not do everything, just have everything they want, or be able to do everything they want, because it will make for a much more afflicted life when they've all of a sudden realized that they really can't have everything like they thought they could. Another personality, let's call it that, that makes for very, very sad or very afflicted existence is that of an ungrateful person. If you, a little bit like the previous example that I used, but more towards I deserve everything there, and everything that's done for me is just because it is, and my mom cooks for me every night and that's it. There's no concept of understanding or being grateful for what it is that she's doing. That person, or when we live that way, when we don't pay attention to everything that is around us and done for us, and we're not grateful for that, that eventually makes us blind to all those benefits that we have, and that obviously will push people away, which will cause in turn the affliction of when people aren't actually doing anything for us anymore, of us just losing our minds over why isn't everyone doing everything for me anymore, and why doesn't the world do more for me? Why don't why can't I get paid better, or why can't I win the lottery, or whatever? It's we become when you're not grateful, you really have no understanding of value, and the affliction comes from that, from not when you don't understand the value of what the world has done for you, it's very hard or very easy to be afflicted when that's no longer happening. Then there's those people who set very high expectations, who live in fantasy land, right? And instead of living in being the center of the universe, they sometimes live in parallel universes where they'll come up with these big, massive fantasies. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be the biggest basketball player, or most famous singer, or whatever. And they keep just, they think they're trying to achieve a dream, and really, they're trying to and what they're doing is they're painting very high expectations of life for themselves, and and they don't realize that they don't control everything, and you set yourself for major failure and you keep being afflicted because you don't get that fantasy that you wanted. I'm not saying obviously that people shouldn't work on their dreams or follow their dreams. Obviously, that is what they ought to do. I mean, the world can only be better by people who push what it is that they like to do, and they do better than that. But when we couple a couple of these things together, if you set high expectations and you're generally ungrateful, things will be very hard, because you're not working towards a dream. You're trying to live a fantasy, and there's a very big difference there. And obviously, there are the people who are pessimists. People who you ask, how are you doing today? And it's like, I'm not sure. Or, and the example here was funny because she said something like, as you go say something to a person, and they'll say, well, how you doing? And they're like, well, as God intends. And what's the answer? I mean, if you're a positive person, it's like, well, then everything's great, all right? I mean, if everything's just going as God wants, I mean, He has to want something good for you. It's like, well, things aren't very good. And then there's something wrong with the way you're treating God, or vice versa here, because, so you can't really say like, well, God willing or anything. No, it's if you're not feeling well yourself, or being optimistic yourself, it's not really God's fault. It's like the person who's looking for the end of the tunnel, and seeing and saying, well, I reached the end of the tunnel. Where's the end of it? Where's the rest of the tunnel? And or I reached the bottom of the pit. Let me dig some more. And we're always, there are people who are just always very pessimistic, and then there are the people who are always unsatisfied. And this one, I have a little bit of that sometimes. I have to work. I've worked hard before, and people who have tendencies to look at what didn't work, and something worked out quite well, but they focus really hard on something that didn't work. They play a Mozart piece for 15 minutes, and then they bow and they leave, and they're like, I missed that one chord, and it's like, which one? Well, no, you didn't hear it. And a person it's supposed to play this beautiful thing. Everybody's happy, everybody's clapping, and the one thing that they remember from that performance is that one chord that they didn't hit right. And maybe one person noticed, out of thousands. Maybe a few more did, but it's putting so much importance in what didn't work instead of what did work. And so let's can you turn the slide on? So I wanted to bring this other message here. So that was obviously, I hope, a little bit. I hope it was clear. There was a little bit of the whole, how people can manage to not suffer well. And so I wanted to bring this message that we often show here in Portuguese on Saturdays, and sometimes on Mondays also. But it's a very interesting reflection on the reasons why we suffer, and it's by Albino Teixeira, the Spirit, and Chico Xavier was the psychographic medium, where he talks about what we suffer most in the world. And it's obviously, it's got a cadence to it in Portuguese. It's a little, and it's got a little more. This is translated from Portuguese, so maybe maybe there's a couple of words that could be better, but hopefully the message itself is clear enough. So what we suffer the most in the world, what we suffer most in the world, it is not the difficulty, it is the discouragement in overcoming. So often, we are faced with something that we know is difficult. And the more we know is difficult, the more we think we have to act like it's difficult, the more we are discouraged by even trying. And so instead of attempting and doing our best and suffering because something was difficult, we suffer because we decide not to do it, and we lose the courage to work towards that. So in the example of the soldier in the battle there, it's like this. Sometimes we are like the soldier that just wants to remain in camp. There is, he's in that zone, and he knows that all the other soldiers, when they come back from battle, will be judging him, and he won't get the promotion that he's looking for, but he's discouraged by what he knows is going to be difficult ahead. What we suffer most in the world, it's not the ordeal, it is the despair in the face of suffering. And so, our trials, the trials that we are put in front of us in this world, as we always say, and in this world of trials and atonements, it's not the trial itself often that is the greatest affliction. Well, our suffering sometimes comes from just the despair of being in front of that suffering, and so we suffer because we suffer. And it's funny to think that way, but it's suffering for suffering's sake sometimes. And the pessimists, as we said before, are very much like that. I know this won't go well, so I'm already not well. What we suffer most in the world, it's not the disease, it is the dread of receiving it. I know I've known people that have both passed and lost their lives to cancer, and I know some that have beat cancer earlier in their lives and are still healthy, and obviously they have to keep check of their health, but are otherwise healthy individuals. And often the people who do best, either both in cases that that end up in disincarnation, and cases that ends up in the person being fully recovered. It's the person who takes it in with a positive attitude that makes all the difference. The example from a friend or a person that I knew, that used to say, people would ask her how she was doing as she was going through chemo, and she lived through that for a few years. She used to say, I'm doing really well. It's my body that's not holding up so good. And so that's the attitude that life begs of us. We are invited to not dread the disease in itself, or the afflictions in themselves, but instead to face it and be ready for the adversity and work through it. so what we suffer most in the world? It's not the unhappy relative. It is the grief of having him or her in the family team. So, sometimes we blame a lot of the problems in our lives, or we like to blame a lot of the problems in our lives to those, on those that are in our family, whether parents, whether brothers, sisters, etc., who somehow or another we had trouble with, and and so we, people are afflicted by that and suffer and blame the relative for all of it, and it's really not the fact that the relative is the problem. It's really, our unhappiness of even having them be a part of our family, of our, family team, as he says here. What we suffer most in the world, it's not failure itself. It is the stubbornness of not recognizing one's mistakes, right? So widely discussed or told that Thomas Edison, tried to create the electric lamp for over 1,000 times, and at every time he figured out, okay, that's another way, I can't do it. And how many of us give up, or can't accept that things are what they are, and then what do I have to do what do I have to fix in myself to make it better, right? So often it's we something doesn't work, we like to blame something else or somebody else. And I have a friend who it's a really weird story, but who's so his sister blamed their mother for for the fact that her boyfriend's band never succeeded. Right, that's a really interesting story, because it was like, well, he couldn't really devote himself to make his music because he had to work, and you could have just supported me and him, in the apartment that you have. And so you didn't support me, and you didn't pay for for us to live, and for him to just work at his craft until he could make it. And so therefore it's her fault, right? I mean, obviously that's an extreme example, but like we go to extremes to blame others for our own failures sometimes, right? And not recognizing where it is that we could have done better, or we could do better next time. What we suffer most in the world is not just ingratitude. It's not just being ungrateful. It's the inability to love others without selfishness. So we had talked about the people who are ungrateful, and that's obviously that is one thing, and it's not the fact that others are ungrateful to us that is what's the biggest suffering. It's the cause of the suffering is because we can't love without being selfish, right? I mean, people who are ungrateful, it's their problem. It's like I already talked about them as being the problem. And if I'm expecting somebody to be grateful for everything that I do, then it's my problem at that point. If I can't love without being selfish, yes, I will suffer, because I will always be looking for that confirmation or that gratitude that I'm not getting. Loving, as the message of Jesus is told to us, does not require a way back. Love is something that we give. As I heard here before, love is forgiving, right? We have to forgive, but we also have to give love. It's forgiving. That's what love is. what we suffer the most in the world is not our own size, our own minuteness. It is the revolt against the superiority of others. Gosh, that almost didn't come out. Superiority of others. Envy is, it's one of the major sins, right? As it's known in the seven sins, for a reason. I mean, it makes it. People who are envious, they suffer quite a bit. And they suffer enough that it causes them to act on it sometimes. And so, if I'm feeling small, or if I'm feeling like I'm not being treated as I should be, sometimes that's not. It's not because I'm feeling small or because I am small. It's because I can't get past the fact that I think that everybody else is greater than me, and that will make me suffer, right? And so, that's another way that we suffer more than the suffering itself. What we suffer most in the world, it is not the injury, it is the wounded pride. Again, people will do things to us, and often it's not what it is that it's said or that it's done. It's how our pride gets in the way, and how our pride guides our reactions to everything. I can't, let that happen. Or that person did this and that to me, and you're like, okay, well, that didn't change your life, did it? Well, but now I got to show her, I got to show him, and the suffering then doesn't come from exactly what they did, but how we will continuously, not let that go, and not forgive them. For the trespasses or the injuries they cause us, because our pride will not let us, and therefore we will continuously suffer. When we talk about forgiveness here, the Gospel according to Spiritism talks a lot about forgiveness, and the bottom line of the idea of forgiveness is that we do it for ourselves more than we do it for those who we need to forgive, because otherwise that pride, that wounded pride, festers within us, and it is the suffering that will, that guides so many decisions, and often so many poor decisions in our lives. What we suffer the most in the world is not temptation. Mackenzie was talking about temptation earlier. It is the voluptuousness of experiencing them. It's the consequences of actually sinking into temptation, and what it is that what comes from that. And with the example that he gave there, if we are to be righteous, we have to learn to not just give in to temptation, especially when we're trying, when we're looking at the little speck of dust on our neighbor's eyes, but we forget the big stick that's in our own eyes. It's important for us to also not fall into temptations that we assign to our neighbors as well. What we suffer the most in the world is not the age of the body; it's the passion for appearance. All right, I'm not sure if I need to talk too much about this, but yeah, some of us, especially like some of us that have some natural genetic afflictions. I mean, if like Alini said on Saturday, you have the perfect beach body. It's your body. And unless we learn to be kind to ourselves and our own bodies, and understand, another one that I read recently, I think on Facebook or some social media site, it was something, you should exercise not because, you should exercise because you love your body, not because you hate it. Because often we just have the wrong, sometimes we think we have the right intentions, we just have the wrong reasons, right? So, a lot of us are compelled to go to the gym or to exercise and so on and so forth, because we feel like, I can't go out to the beach with this body, or, I can't let my little, small defects on my face dictate anything. So I need to fix that to be happy. And of course, that will not address the problems of aging, the problems of our natural genetic dispositions, and our own getting old. And so we suffer much more because we can't give in to our vanity, then we suffer just because there's something wrong with our body, or because our body is getting old. It's not the age, it's our vanity, it's our passion for appearances. And he concludes his message with this last paragraph: as it is easy to see, in solving any problem, the worst problem is the burden of distress that we create, develop, and sustain against ourselves. And that was that was the key of that message, is that all of it comes back to what we are doing to ourselves, and how we treat how we treat ourselves, and how we face the things that are afflict us. And if our way of dealing with these afflictions don't really, if we can't look back inside ourselves and see what the root of the suffering is not the appearance like he was saying here. It's not the body itself, it's not what it first looks like, but more how we deal with it. By knowing ourselves and seeing that in ourselves, we are able then to hopefully work and get better at dealing with these afflictions. And so we talked a lot. Before this little message, I talked about many ways that we choose sometimes to suffer poorly. Obviously, in here, the conclusion being, it's mostly because we're not even paying attention to ourselves and seeing what the harms that we are doing to ourselves in the way that we're dealing with these afflictions. And so obviously, to finish in a positive note, I wanted to bring in then some ideas of how perhaps we can suffer well, or learn to suffer better in our lives. So the first thing, in converse to what we had discussed about being ungrateful, it's pretty clear then that there's one way to fix that. It's being grateful. Being grateful changes your life, our lives, for the better, no doubt. So where I got this, our friend Sandra Barba, mentioned this story. Says, I don't even know if the story is true or not, but some story that had been heard that this guy, it's he's an executive of a company that's not doing so well, and it's Christmas time and so on. And he leaves the office on Christmas Eve, and a little late. It's dark, cold, and as he's walking home, he's walking past the park, and he sees this woman, um, you know, picking trash, you know, this homeless woman in the streets as he's going by, and she sees a lot of birds swoop in and just sort of make a beautiful showing of coordination. It's just beautiful birds come to her, and she says, "Oh God, oh Lord, you spoil me. I'm so happy that you sent these birds here, gave me this little bit of the show just for me this Christmas evening." And the story goes to say how that guy, kind of just forgot of all his problems that night and kept going and realized that things would go well no matter what happened to him. Because if that woman who had nothing could be happy and grateful to God for just that little showing of a few birds in front of her that made her happy that evening, he realized that he could be happy with less also. A lot of us end up being very oh yes, and one more thing on this, understanding. Then we began with the whole with the understanding that that suffering will come to us because it is part of our human nature to go through these trials ourselves. Then and so in the spirit of being grateful and being thankful, also being thankful for this need that we have to go through these trials, and if we can be positive about it, then we can beat that affliction, and we will be doing the suffering well that Lacordaire invites us to as well. Happiness, internal happiness. Happiness is not something that we need, that we have in this world. As I said, the example of the woman who had cancer and was, and always had the attitude of I'm feeling great. I mean, my body is not well, but personally I am great. My body is sick, and she would joke around sometimes about, hey, there were times when shaving one's head was all the rage. So I'm just back in those days. She had no hair due to chemotherapy, and so it's that positive attitude in life as having that happiness, that being just grateful and thankful for life itself, helps us go through a lot of these things. Having a detachment is another thing listed here. Being detached, not emotionally, but being detached to the things that don't matter, to to the things that are material. We attach ourselves a lot to to our goals, or to our career, or to our spouse, and so on, and happiness can't will not always come, or happiness itself can't come from having those things, right? I mean, I am happy, I am married, I have my wife, I'm happy that I have her, but I also need to be happy for being happy, because that's good for me, right? I mean, my kids will grow up, things will change, I'll have different jobs. I'm happy that I have my job today. When I don't have it anymore, I will be looking to find something to be happy about after that. And when we are not constantly attached to things like that, we're not creating new reasons to suffer. And so it's not being detached emotionally. Of course not. I mean, we are in we are in society. We have to work together. We have to grow together. But as I said in the beginning, happiness, knowing oneself is the first step, and everybody around us should basically, though they're ways to help us better ourselves, so we can be better for them as well. But all of that ends up coming from inside. And so, just to finish up, in a message from Divaldo Franco, who had had a few things to say about suffering. But the thing to remember is that our suffering, our afflictions, are transitory. They're not a part of who we are, forever. Everything that we go through in life is happening, for that time, and the sooner we deal with it, the sooner we learn to accept it. As acceptance. Speaking of acceptance, there's a passage in the Gospel according to Spiritism that talks about obedience and resignation. And it's a very nice, interesting message, because sometimes we think about what God wants from us and what God gives us and the sufferings that we go through, and the message reminds us that being obedient to God and to His wishes is really has to be something that our reasoning gives. We are obedient. It's basically I'm obedient to God, and that's something I can do with my reasoning. But sometimes I know that I have to go through suffering, and that's resignation, and that's the heart. The heart has to overcome that, and so. Being obedient and resigned doesn't mean that we have to suffer. That we suffer just for suffering. It's that we understand why we suffer, and that we accept that suffering, and we make the best of it. And we find ways to be positive. We find ways to better ourselves, to go through this ourselves. And so to finish. There's a song in Portuguese where the poet says something that's very, very interesting, and I think very true. For us to be happy, we just have to look within ourselves, as he says here. Everyone has in oneself the capacity of being happy. We have the capacity, and we have the capacity of being happy, and that lives within ourselves. It's not something that needs to come from the outside. On the contrary, it needs to come from within towards others. Because if everybody around us is not happy, what am I doing to change that, to make that be different? I wish everyone a lot of happiness, a lot of positive attitude, a lot of positive responses to the things that afflict us. And I hope that the message, though a little longer than usual, was helpful. And I hope that that some of this applies to you all. And I wish God, and I ask God to keep watch over us, keep blessing us today, and always, and through this week that has started and always. Thank you very much. Good night.